Welcome to this episode of The Wisdom of Paramahansa Yogananda, brought to you by Self-Realization Fellowship, where each week you can receive inspiration and guidance from Paramahansa Yogananda's Kriya Yoga teachings. This talk is titled, Your Thoughts Can Change Your Life, by Brother Anandamoy.
Good evening. It's a total joke that I'm here now. It may be funny for you, it's not funny for me, because when I came, I didn't have any voice at all. So I thought, now it's up to Master. If he wants me to give this talk, fine. If not, you'll hear it some other time. It's a very important subject that we have tonight. We are going to change our lives tonight, isn't it? The thing is, the first one, I want to begin with the obvious, and sometimes not so obvious, karma. Our Guru used to say, whatever you give out will come back to you. And sometimes we do not think about that, otherwise we would be more careful, isn't it? Now, I think many people do not understand this. We are not responsible for the negative aspects or the evil aspects in creation. God is responsible for that. He did it. And you have it in the Bible, in the Old Testament, where God spoke through Isaiah. I am the Lord, there is none else beside me. I form the light and create darkness. I make peace and create evil. I, the Lord, do all these things. He had to do it. I wish he hadn't, in order to have creation, because creation couldn't exist without duality, without contrast, darkness and light, good and evil. And in order to have this complex creation, he created these vast spheres of thought, different kinds of thoughts, just like radio waves. You have different vibrations, isn't it? Different frequencies. And so likewise, that is why Sri Yukteswarji said, you read this in the autobiography of a yogi, when he said, thought is universally rooted, not individually. In other words, if we are thinking any kind of thought, we are not creating that thought. God has already created that. And that is why the Master used to say, he put us here, and so he is responsible, besides our own efforts. There is nobody that will ever be damned forever, because originally he created this creation, and he put us here, and he will get us out. But we have to help. We have to do our part. Now, even though we are not responsible for negation or darkness or evil in this world, it makes all the difference in the world to which sphere of thought we are attuned, isn't it? And according to our thoughts, we are attuned to a certain frequency of God's thought. If we are thinking harmonious thoughts, we are in attunement with that. If we are thinking negative thoughts, we are in attunement with the universal sphere of destruction. It's very important to remember that. And that is why Master used to say, you think of that little mind that you have, but you are connected with the ocean. There's tremendous power in this universe, and we are always connected somehow with a tremendous power. And the more we become conscious of that, the more power we have in our own lives. Now, I want to go into a few aspects of this subject of mind, thought. One of them is, you learned that today in a class on concentration, isn't it? To do away with the distractions. That doesn't apply only to meditation. That applies also in our daily life, in our outer activities. It means simplifying our lives. Simplifying not the external life necessarily, but the inner thought life. I'll tell you an old story. A few years ago, some of us had to go, just a couple of us had to go to Europe to take care of some business for the organization. And in Paris, we finished our work sooner than we expected. And so I went to the travel agency to change the flight reservations. And it was the height of the tourist season. And that place was packed with people. And there was a tremendous vibration of tension and of impatience. And there was a woman who was at the counter, and she had a great big bag, and she was looking for something in her bag and couldn't find it. And then finally, exasperated, she turned that whole thing upside down, and everything came out. Everything. And there was a ripple of laughter going through the whole place, and everybody relaxed, including that woman. Because what she had in her bag, you wouldn't believe it. It was more interesting than Paris. But you know, if you are sensitive, you are learning through things like that. And I thought, this is a reminder, what am I going to do with the bag of my mind? And so I would like to caution you, use your discrimination. I realize life is very complex today, but there is a lot of stuff that the world is trying to throw at you. Don't take it all in. Don't take it all in. Do you watch television? Huh? Do you watch the news on television? Don't. Then there's another aspect. My room at Martha's Center has a door which opens to the backyard. And usually I keep it open at night because I like to have fresh air. And so recently, at night, I sat on my bed for my evening meditation and had turned the light off. And then I heard a noise at the door inside the room. And I thought probably a cat. I switched on the light and looked. It wasn't a cat. It was a skunk. And he was already inside. And he came in, he checked out the whole room, everything very carefully, very systematically, and I didn't move. You don't move if you have a skunk in your room. And so it was a beautiful animal, and carried just a tiny touch of fragrance. Really, I really admired that. Just a tiny, very scientific, just a tiny touch. May have been a girl skunk. So anyway, finally she left. You know what they are saying? Our mind is a room with one door, and you have the key to that door. And it is up to us to decide who and what is coming in. Now, I wasn't taught that when I was a child, in my home or in school, and you probably were not taught that either, isn't it? Mental control. And then by the time we are coming on a spiritual path and we hear about mental control, mental discipline, we have already the habit of having that door wide open. Wide open. And everything is coming in, including skunks. Skunks of negation. I'll give you a couple of examples. And there was a man who had an accident. His body was burned 80%. He was in intensive care. I checked with the doctor, and he said, no way, no chance, no chance. So he was there, but he was a church-going man. He was a good man. And he was praying. People in the church were praying. And he started getting better and better. And then he thought about his life, and he thought, I have made so many mistakes. I'm a sinful man. I do not deserve to be healed. Healing process stopped. He got worse and worse. And then one day, in desperation, he asked a nurse, somebody had brought a Bible, and he asked a nurse to open it at random and read to him. And she opened it. It was the 130th Psalm. And she read, and I'm freely translating now. If the Lord should mark iniquities, who can stand? Meaning we all have made mistakes. But there is forgiveness. There is mercy. And then a nurse took routinely his temperature. And she said, temperature is down. You're getting better. And it was absolutely amazing. It can work that fast. In the beginning, that negative thought, I do not deserve to be healed. It paralyzed his immune system. And when that thought was changed, God is forgiveness. God has mercy. Positive thought. Immediately, it can work that fast. The immune system was reactivated. I'll give you another story, another example. There was a man who went to a counselor, and he told him all about his life. And he said, all my life I have been a failure. The trouble is I don't have any brains. Counselor said, how do you know you don't have any brains? And he said, well, when I was very young, I was told I don't have any brains. I'm no good. All the brains in the family were inherited by my brother. The counselor said, now who told you that? And he said, my brother. I didn't make that up. That's a true story. And you have no idea how many people have a very similar experience. He picked that negative thought up in childhood, when his reasoning faculty was not fully developed. And he took that suggestion, that negative suggestion, that's a skunk of negation. He carried it all the way through in his life. The result, nothing but failure. Another aspect, life is a school. And school means a lot of tests. And we do not like tests. Ego doesn't like tests. But the Master says every test is a stepping stone in your advancement towards divine perfection. What do we think about those tests? I'll tell you a story. I'll give you an example. It was in the 60s. There was a panel discussion on television here in Los Angeles. There were about 10 or 12 representatives from different religious organizations and churches and so on to discuss spiritual subjects, what is God and things like that. And there was a bishop there and some other big titles, and the Self-Realization Fellowship was represented by one of Master's little boys. And so, first thing was we had to go to the TV makeup man. Not for makeup, just for the powder on our faces, And I was the last one. The other ones, other representatives, were already in the studio in order to, where the filming was going to take place. And I sat there in that chair, and I was dressed in my suit and scarf and the lotus pin, and the makeup man looked at me rather sarcastically and said, "Who do you represent?" I said, "Self-Realization Fellowship." He said, "Never heard of it. What's that?" And I explained to him, and I said that it was founded by Paramahansa Yogananda, and that did it. His eyes were that big, and he said, "Yogananda, who wrote the book?" "Autobiography of a Yogi." I said, "Yes, that's right." He said, "Man, I just read that book. Great book." He was all excited, walking up and down. Great book, great book. Then he said, "I want to do something. I want to do something for you." And he looked at me and his face lit up. And he said, "You know what? I'm going to give you a makeup job." You won't believe it. I thought, oh my God. And I knew I am not dealing with that man. He was only an instrument. And I said, no, you can't do that. He said, "Oh, yes." He said, "You are going to look great. Not like those other guys." And he made up my face, you wouldn't believe it. I thought I'm going to look like a clown. And then when he was finished with my face, he started on top of my hip. I said, "What are you doing?" He said, "I'm painting in hair where you don't have any." I said, no, you can't do that. He said, "Oh, well, it doesn't look right here, but on a screen it will look just like real hair. Trust me, I know." I said, no, that's not the point. The point is, our local members know about this program, and they're going to watch. And they know I don't have any hair, so what will I think when I appear on television? With hair. He said, "They'll love it." Did you notice? While I was telling that story, how many times I said no? And that's the point I want to bring out. I didn't do so well in that test. I said no again and again. Now, Master explained, if we are going through a test, that's positive action. And if we are reacting or thinking negatively, if we are resisting with negative thought, to the degree as there is negation in our mind, to that degree we are minimizing the progress, meaning learning of the lesson that comes through that test. And that is why he said, if you're really negative mentally, your progress is in that test reduced to almost zero. Tough, isn't it? And that means that later on, we will have to go through a similar test again until we learn the lesson. Tough, isn't it? And so what we have to do, when a test comes, we have to understand, this is God's way to bring us closer to Him and accept it, flow with it, instead of resisting. Besides that deep aspect that I just explained, it makes life much more simple, much more easy, isn't it? There was a young man who was in the Navy, and he went through, what do they call that, boot training? After boot training, he went home to visit his parents, and he told them all about the difficulties he had had in the beginning. And then he said, and then one day, I decided to let the Navy have its way in everything. And that was the end of my problems. In the beginning, resisting, rebelling, and that hurt. Afterwards, flow with it, accept it, everything is okay. Simple, isn't it? There was a woman who talked about her marriage, and she said, my husband and I, we are really good friends. We're really getting along very nicely. 75% of our marriage is perfectly fine. The other 25%, trouble. Why? There are certain things in him that I do not like, and I want him to change. There are certain things in me that he doesn't like, that he wants to change. And even though essentially, basically, we have a good marriage, that lack of acceptance of each other in everything turns our essentially good marriage into hell. Think about it. We are not here for ego satisfaction. We are not here to change other people. We are in school. We are to change ourselves. I'll tell you another one. It could be very, very serious. There was, in the 50s, and there was a family, husband and wife, and two sons, late teenage sons. They were the regular members that came to our Hollywood temple. They never missed a service, never missed a meditation. And in those days, we had very, very few young people, like teenagers, very, very few. The young people came later on, around the 70s. It was very interesting. And so the other members, they looked with great admiration at those young boys And the older one, it got into his head. He became proud. Spiritual pride is the greatest obstacle on a spiritual path. And then it happened. He got a notice, I think it was towards the end of the Korean War, he got notice that he would be drafted into the army. And I thought, I have been in the army, Swiss army. I know what it is. And I thought, from a spiritual standpoint, this is the greatest blessing for that boy. The greatest blessing, because it is exactly what he needs to advance spiritually, to knock that pride out of him. But he didn't see it that way. The whole family didn't see it. Their thought was, how could God dare do that to us? And they all left the path. And they were all Kriya buns. And Master said, Kriya is the highest key to salvation. And he said, if somebody receives it and throws it away, he has to wait many incarnations until he receives it again. I thought, oh my God, why didn't they see it? It was a blessing, and they didn't understand. And so, many times when we are going through tests, we do not understand because we do not see the whole picture, isn't it? And then what about that? And the Master said, you will not understand fully until in the end when you see the whole picture. And then he said, you cannot doubt the wisdom of God. But until then, he said, don't question God. Love him and accept what comes into your life because it is for your own good. You do not see it now, but in the end you will understand. Accept positive thought. So, these are different aspects. And there are many more. I have no time to go into everything. What I want to do now is I want to boil it down into a very simple principle. And then I think you will see that all the different things that I have said so far and the things that I haven't said yet will fall into place. And everything, I think, becomes very clear. It was in the 50s. I think it was during that time when they started to make computers. And it was at that time when some scientists and psychologists and so on, they analyzed and compared man with a computer, that we are similarly made and so on. And they started at that time really working with mind, experimenting with the power of thought. And I remember I read at that time an article from a doctor who said that man, each person, has built in a success mechanism. Isn't that great? And all we have to do is understand how it works and operate it, and bingo, you are successful. And he said, man is a goal-searching creature. And if he doesn't have a goal, he disintegrates. Now, this is nothing new, has been taught for ages. But I want to explain it now, especially in the light of our Guru's teachings, because he said the same thing. The key is the goal. Now, we all have the same goal. The supreme goal, the main purpose why we are here on this earth is God realization. That's the inner goal. And then there are outer goals, and these are different with each one because that depends on karma, desires, certain lessons that we have to learn. That's the outer goal, our goals. And some people think, well, there's a conflict between the outer endeavors and the inner. Not true, if we understand it rightly. Not true. No conflict, because God, we have to keep in mind, God is the cosmic movie director. And we are playing the role, and we have to be serious. God wants us to be successful. We are playing the outer role. If we are playing it for ourselves or ego satisfaction only, we are missing the point. Then there is conflict between the outer and the inner. But if we are remembering, every once in a while thinking, I do this for you, my Lord, then it is spiritualized and there is no more conflict. And so for simplicity's sake, I say the goal, even though they are different ones, of course, as I just explained. Now, the chief goal, of course, is God realization. Now, what does Master say about that? You remember reading in The Science of Religion when he says, you have to have a compelling desire for God. That means the goal has to be clearly, precisely established, visualized. And then it is very simple, isn't it? If we have a compelling goal, that all our forces, all our energies are directed towards accomplishment, reaching that goal, isn't it? That's quite clear. The mind, the willpower, the emotions, the energy, everything is directed, is channeled in a constructive way towards that goal. If a person doesn't have a goal, it disintegrates. Because that means that those forces are still working, they're still operating. They're not turned off like you turn off a water faucet. But having no proper purpose to channel those forces, where do they go? Destruction. And you look at the world today, how many people, it's so sad, how many people are caught in that trap? They destroy themselves through alcohol, through drugs, through dissipation, and so on. Simply because they do not understand what life is all about. They do not understand. They do not have a goal. Now, Master went further than that. Not only our energies and our faculties have to work together. The three dimensions of our consciousness have to work together with it. Conscious mind, subconscious, and superconscious mind. And the Master said, now he's referring to the outer goal. He said, if a person has a goal that is not in harmony with God's laws, superconsciousness will not cooperate. Because that's the soul, that's God within, will not cooperate. And that is the main force, the main supply house of all our powers. And when you look at the great villains of history, they were bound to fail. Why? Because their goals were not in harmony with God's laws. And they did not have the supply house. The main force did not cooperate. So you have the picture. All our forces in a conscious, supreme effort, everything is channeled towards accomplishment of that goal. In connection, I want to say this. Every once in a while, there is emphasis on hypnosis, self-hypnosis. Nowadays, it is subliminal tapes, that sort of thing. Forget it. Those mechanical gimmicks are working independently of your efforts on just one little aspect of all those forces. They can never produce the deep, profound, lasting changes that are needed to find God. Never. Listen to the saints. Listen to the Guru. Listen to the scriptures and to the teachings that came down from the higher enlightened ages. They never taught mechanical gimmicks like that. It's always all the forces in a concentrated effort. You have it in the Bible. What I just said, the formula is in the Bible. You'll find it in the Old Testament. You'll find it in the New Testament. What is it? The greatest law, the greatest commandment is thou shalt love God. God, that's the goal. With all your heart, all your mind, all your soul, all your strength. That's the formula. It's so sad that people do not understand the deep meaning of those great teachings. In Hindu scriptures, exactly the same thing. Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita teaches exactly the same thing 5,000 years ago. And in the Hindu scriptures, what is the goal? Union with God, isn't it? There is a word for it which you are all familiar with, samadhi. And in the autobiography of a yogi, the master explains, samadhi means literally to direct together. Same principle. All the forces directed together, a conscious effort to find God. So, the key is the goal. The master used to say, if you're not happy, it means that you do not visualize clearly enough what you want to do, meaning you do not have a clear goal. That's the key. Think about it. Tonight, when you're by yourself, think about it. Establish the goal, as Gyanamata, a great disciple of Master, said, always keep the goal shining before you. And it's not enough to have a vague desire like, I want to be happy, I want to be rich, and I want to be famous, and so on. It has to be more clear, more defined. Now, we have to have it so clear and constantly repeating, constantly remembering, because that's the key of the inner success mechanism. And thought is powerful. And it was in the 50s when I started to make experiments with thought. For instance, in college basketball, they made an experiment. They had one group of students who had daily practice sessions in throwing the ball into the basket for 3 weeks. They had another group who were practicing throwing the ball into a basket. They never touched the ball, only mentally, visualizing. After 3 weeks, they tested. The first group, they had increased their skill 24%. The other group, who had never touched the ball, just mentally practicing, they had increased their skill 23%, almost the same. Such is the power of mind. And this has become great business in sports, you know. The athletes, they're not only training with the guidance of a coach, they have psychologists who train their mind And they know today, if two athletes have the same training, the same skill physically, the one that is mentally better trained is the one that wins. There was a nice story in the last Olympic Games. There was such a little girl, 17-year-old, was a member of the American swimming team. And before the competition, she was interviewed, and she was asked, "Aren't you afraid? You're just a little girl. Aren't you afraid to compete against those big, powerful women?" She smiled and said, "I'm not afraid. I trained just as hard as they did. I can win." And she did. Broke the world record, got the gold medal. And I am absolutely convinced that girl did not only train hard physically, she trained her mind, did not permit a single negative thought. The goal was there. Positive thought was there. I can win. And now comes a very, very important aspect in connection with this, particularly for devotees. You'll love it. Is there anybody here who never made a mistake? What about our mistakes? Do you know what the great saints say about it? When you look at Sri Yukteswar's picture, looks rather stern, isn't it? What did he say about mistakes? You read it in the autobiography of a yogi. Human conduct is ever unreliable until man is anchored in the divine. Meaning, as long as we have not God realization, as long as we do not have the divine perfection, we are bound to make mistakes. And then he said, forget the past. The past of all man is dark with many shames. Everything in future will improve if you are making a spiritual effort now. That's the attitude. That's the teaching of the great saints. In other words, forget the past, forget the mistakes that you have made. Concentrate not on darkness, concentrate on a goal, make the effort. What does Master, our Guru, say? If you have made a mistake, learn a lesson from it and forget unnecessary details. Same thing. Learn the lesson. Don't dwell on a mistake. Go on, make the effort. And he often said to us, if you fall down, pick yourself up and walk on. If you fall flat again, get up and walk on. Saint is a sinner that never gave up. And you read it in the sayings of Paramahansa Yogananda. He talked about the devotee in India who made a serious mistake. And then he said, he did not allow that mistake to become the center of his life. Do you understand the principle? And when you look at successful men and women in this world, if you read their lives, you see they all made mistakes. There was a chief executive of one of the biggest, most successful commercial companies in the United States. He made a remarkable statement. He said there is not a single executive in this company whose name has not been connected with a product that failed. Not one. They all made mistakes. But they didn't sit down and say, oh, I'm no good, I'm a failure, poor me, and everything is lost. No, they learned from their mistake and they went on. That's the key. It is like the illustration is given like a torpedo that is self-guided or guided by sonar or whatever. If that is launched against a moving target, that torpedo does not go in a straight line. It makes corrections along the way. And so the idea is our mistakes are to be regarded as corrections on a path. It's part of the learning process. It's not, we have to watch that they are not darkening our mind. And now I refer back again to some of the stories I've told. Remember that woman in Paris with her bag? Who had so much junk in her bag that she couldn't find what she wanted? Now remember, if a person does not have a clearly defined goal, if we are permitting all that junk that the world wants to throw at us, if we are taking it all in, what happens to the goal? Doesn't it stand to reason that it becomes fuzzy? Or gets lost in the commotion inside? Remember the skunk? I tell you, when that skunk was in my room, my whole consciousness was on that skunk. And if we permit a skunk of negation to come and take over our mind, if we keep dwelling on that dark or negative experience, to our inner computer, that thought becomes the goal. Do you understand? And so I would like to say again, we all can do better. Remove those things which are not essential. Remove the trash. And remove the skunks of negation. And establish the goal clear. It's not only our mistakes, it's any negative experience we have had. It could be a failure in business, it could be a failed marriage, it could be a tragedy in our lives, such as the loss of a loved one or whatever. Do not permit a dark experience, a negative experience, to become the center of your life. I give you an illustration, an example. It was in the 60s. Early in the 60s, I made several lecture tours through Europe. And I clearly remember the first time I went to Italy. I went to the big cities like Milan, Rome, and I also was asked to go to a smaller town. There was a whole bunch of very nice, very sincere members, about 40, something like that. And so I went there. I had several meetings with them and I had clear initiation. And it was a family affair. You know, wherever I go, it's family, isn't it? Whether it is in Europe, in this country, or wherever I was, or in India. The personal family, I didn't feel close to them, but I feel close to their SRF members. There's a different vibration. There's a different dimension there. This is family. So anyway, the first time I went to the room where we held our meetings, I saw that several of the members were flocking around a young woman. She was in a wheelchair. She was one of the most cheerful, one of the most positive people I've ever met in my life. And a member told me her story. She had been engaged to get married. And one day she went to her seamstress for the last fitting of her wedding gown. And on the way home, she was in an accident which left her paralyzed from the waist down. As a result, there was no marriage. And she told me afterwards, she said, that really made me search. And then with enthusiasm she said, and I found my guru, Paramahansa Yogananda. I found his great teaching. What more could I ask for? That was in the early 60s. She is still in a wheelchair. She writes to me once in a while. Still as positive as could be. And I thought, that woman, even though because of some karmic condition the outer didn't work as she had hoped, she kept that goal alive. And I thought, she's racing like a shooting star toward her goal, sitting in a wheelchair. Why? Because she did not allow that tragedy to become the center of her life. That's where God belongs. And so, if you need a certain adjustment, and as Ganamata said, we all can do better, start out with a new, more clear concept of what you want to do, what you want to accomplish in your life. And it goes very fast, very fast. You can make the adjustment. I remember some years ago when I was in charge of our lake shrine. Once in a while, a devotee might come and being discouraged, being bruised by the battle of life. And I used to say, now, you go and walk around the lake a couple times and do some deep breathing. No negative thought. You affirm, God loves me, Guru loves me, everything is all right. And after they had done that, some of them thought I had performed a miracle. I don't perform any miracles. What they had experienced was the miracle of a changed thought from negative to positive. And they walked away like kings and queens, with the thought, I can make it. I can win the battle of life. Thought. And so some of you may be living somewhere where you do not have much contact with other members. Somehow you are all alone in a struggle, in your spiritual striving. Remember this. Read that new book, Where There Is Light. It's a marvelous, marvelous how to live book. Refer to it again and again. And give it to your friends. If they are not members, give them anyone. It's a wonderful book, very positive. And it says in there, think of God as your environment. Think of God as your environment. No matter where you are, you can be in the greatest darkness. Think of God as your environment. He is right there. He is omnipresent. And the Master, he used to say to us, to those that think me near, I will be near. Thought, it's as simple as that. He is also omnipresent. If we don't think of him, or when we think he is far away or he is gone, then we are creating that negative thought. And if we think he is here, he is with me right now, he is. It's the truth. He also said, if you're in tune with me, I can take your karma. If you're not in tune, I cannot take it because you shut me out. Thought is the key. It says in one of the Hindu scriptures most beautifully. Your mind is the cause of your bondage. And your mind is the cause of your liberation. Depending, do you have your mind centered on darkness, or do you have your mind centered on God? It's as simple as that. So make that adjustment, and you will see. It's a law, it's a beautiful law. Remember that you have a success mechanism inside. It's a beautiful law. Did you know your thoughts can change your life? God bless you all.
This has been a production of Self-Realization Fellowship, a non-profit organization founded by Paramahansa Yogananda in 1920. For more information about Self-Realization Fellowship and Paramahansa Yogananda, please visit yogananda.org.